Story time. Alright, so Cucumber, why the hell are we looking at a map of the Netherlands? Well, you're looking at the Afsluitdijk or Closure Dike, which is a construction between the provinces of the Netherlands. We're doing a little bit of geography along with history of Friesland, which is over here. This is where Lab lives, or Ludo, not Ludo, whatever. TJ, my friend. And I live over here, so whenever he comes across this thing, because there's a road coming across this, quite a big one, it's like a freeway. And this thing was made in 1928 to sort of close this area off, which was a big inner sea. There was just salt water. It was completely unusable. It flooded the areas around it, especially here on the western end. And as we were trying to still create more land, polders for farming and such, it was deemed a good idea to build a dike across and say, we're making this into a lake, which we did, engineering, fantastic, and we'll put in some artificial islands, although this hasn't been there for very long, but this one has. This is all lake, basically. If you look at the map, for instance, from Crusader Kings, it actually looks kind of correct, and it's all lake. But it was an inner sea at that point in time. Anyway, before this time, during the 16th century, in the forming of the Netherlands, the Dutch discovered that defending yourself against enemies was easily done using the water. Because what could you do? You could basically flood pieces of land to hinder the enemy. And as there were no aircraft back then, that was a very good tactic. You could just flood several fields and punch through a couple of dikes, and people would not be able to reach your towns in the western end of the Netherlands, which was where our power was. Our power base was in Amsterdam and in The Hague. So people couldn't get there. Whenever they attacked from land, if they attacked from the ocean, that would be a different story, but we had a fleet, or ideally we could muster a fleet. Anyway, it wasn't perceived a threat to come from the west, although we did have a couple of wars with England. That being said, most people perceived the threat to come from the east, and that was still the same when we were neutral during the First World War and in the interbellum between the First World War and the Second World War. So we were prepared, but we were not expecting visitors except maybe from Germany. Anyway, that tactic didn't work against the Germans. I'm getting to that. Because actually, once we've built this dike, someone somewhere in the engineering department said, well, that's all good and well. We're building this dike and we're making it into a lake. That's great. However, the Duitsers, yeah, exactly. However, and this is important, they said, it's good that we have the dike, but won't the enemy, if they, come through Friesland, be able to just walk across into the north of Holland and then totally ignore the water down here if we flood it? And they said, yeah, that's a good point. So they decided to build some defense works. And because the Dutch infrastructure department wanted this built, the defense department said, yeah, well, that's all fine, but then you're paying for it. Not sure how that went, but it went down as such that the Department for Water, Structure and Infrastructure paid for the whole construction. And they had a budget that was somewhat larger than the defense budget, as in it was the major budget of the time. They had so much money, in fact, that they got state-of-the-art equipment for the 1930s, I have to say. And building those bunkers that they did were built with the more modern design in them. So basically they looked at what's modern right now, and we're going to do it exactly that way. No, we're not going to waste any money. We're just going to put in the right amount of money and make sure it's perfect. So this became quite a complex down here at the Kornwerder Zand, which is an artificial island used by the workers to create the dam. And they decided to put the bunkers on these ends right here. Basically pointing west, so anyone, or east, anyone coming west from Friesland would be stopped right here. Oh, you think that you like this? All right, well, I might give you more history classes through Twitch. That would be a new thing, wouldn't it? All right. Yeah. Now we're getting to the big story here. The good story, the good stuff. 10th of May, 1940. The Germans invade the Netherlands. They do so. They do so with a couple of army groups. Basically, one big army group coming here through the middle and the north, and a small tail of a second army group going through the south, heading towards France, with the big idea of completely circumventing Belgium and the Ardennes and all the defenses in France in the form of the Maginot Line, which was a big bunker complex here in France, in the east of France. So they said, well, we're going to ignore the whole thing regarding the neutrality of the Netherlands. We have to take that area because we've also got trouble with the British, and we have to have one uninterrupted shoreline all the way down here, eventually. So the Germans had this thing all thought out. Now, Friesland was taken by the German 1st Cavalry Division, which was about good 5,000 men strong. The spearhead of this attack was about 500 men strong, ended up here in Friesland at the western end near the dike. Now, this is where things get interesting, because they knew, because of their let's say their touristy endeavors, they sent tourists in the 1930s to make beautiful pictures of the Netherlands, especially of the defense works of the Netherlands. So they knew that these tourists, quote unquote, had reported there was a bunker complex there. And they came prepared with artillery and all kinds of stuff. However, facing these 5,000 men were about 290 Dutchmen, including my great uncle. Yeah, goddamn tourists. Yeah, really. My great uncle was the second in command at this line, basically, this bunker line. And they had about 200 men, a couple of artillery pieces, 2 exactly, and a lot of machine gun nests dug in, prepared for anything that would be coming at them. And they were expecting the enemy, because obviously this nice, beautiful, long stretch of road is perfect for ending up, for instance, in Amsterdam, and Alkmaar, and Herugewaard, and Den Helder, which was where the Dutch fleet was situated. Well, a small bit of it. The most of it was in the East Indies, but still. It was our main port, our military port for those ships. So it was pretty important to take this. And it was a shortcut, because if you have to go around this whole thing, and you're going to be busy for a while. Anyway, they ended up here at around May 12th and started probing the Dutch defenses. There were 200 men there versus the good 500 of the spearhead of the Germans, and they struck some serious defenders. These guys, they were just, as most Dutch troops, not professional soldiers except for the commanders. Yeah, it's 500. The spearhead was 500 men, but the division was a bit bigger. Anyway, I was getting to that. They thought they would take this pretty simply by shooting it with artillery and then assaulting it. However, this was due to the construction here at the sluices. The Dutch had built this area with bridges that would not do this, but do this. They would swivel, so you would never ever have like something in your field of fire, and you could always see across the dike all the way, like way up here, and you wouldn't be able to get anywhere near those bunkers, which is exactly what happened to the Germans. They never took this position, and my great uncle helped establish that. In fact, the losses on the Dutch side were like 2. I believe 1 was bombed because he was like in a forward position over here in the early days of the assault, and the other died. I don't know, somewhere in the bunkers. There was very few Dutch casualties, and there were over 30 German casualties. I'm not sure about the number exactly, but they had serious injuries and some deaths. And they pulled back, and they called in the Luftwaffe to bomb the crap out of the position. And they wouldn't come. They wouldn't come twice. They called them twice. Like, there's more to this place than we thought. And we tried to bomb it with artillery, but our shells did nothing. And they're giving us some pretty serious defense here. So please bring a bomber and bomb it. And the funny thing is, the second time they tried to assault the position on the 14th, they also got bombed from the ocean because the commander here at the bunkers had called into Den Helder saying, "Well, we could use a gunboat here because there's like a shitload of Germans coming." He said, "Okay," and so they sent a sloop. Wasn't much more than a sloop, an armed sloop with some serious artillery on board, and it came across just around here, I guess, and started firing away at the German positions, lowering their morale even more. And it was only thanks to the bombing of Rotterdam, which is down here, our only city that was completely bombed to the ground, leveled, that they had to surrender eventually. And they didn't like the fact that they had to surrender. They were holding their own pretty well. And when the Germans finally sent an aircraft to actually bomb them, they already had anti-aircraft artillery in place, and they started shooting it, and they even dropped it. They actually managed to shoot it down. So it was never taken, except when the Dutch had to surrender. They got the order to surrender, and that was it. As far as I know, the entire group of defenders was taken prisoner of war. The commander, Christian Boers, he didn't make it. I believe he was shot or he died in 1942 in the war, at least. And my great uncle, I'm not sure what happened to him. I believe he did survive, but he was